The deckhands and the yacht people are all going to lose an hour.
So that'd be Montana and Kale, right?
Yep.
Don't think they're going to be happy to hear that.
This is not up for discussion, Kevin. It is what it is.
She stood beside one of the most famous gold miners in the world for over 3 decades, playing the role of the loyal, tough-as-nails wife that millions of fans adored. But according to insiders, Minnie Beets was allegedly living an entirely different life behind the scenes, one that Tony himself did not fully understand. What secrets has she kept hidden from the public? And what led her to keep a double life away from her own husband? Join us as we pull back the curtain on one of reality television's most surprising untold stories. The woman behind the legend. When most people think of Tony Beets, they think of the barrel-chested, profanity-laced Dutch miner who arrived in the Yukon in 1984 with almost nothing and turned himself into the most feared and respected gold man in the Klondike. But behind every larger-than-life figure, there is usually someone equally compelling holding things together. And for Tony, that person was Minnie. She came into his life in the Netherlands, and when Tony made the decision to uproot everything and head to the Canadian wilderness in search of gold, Minnie made the same leap without hesitation. What viewers saw on Gold Rush was a version of Minnie that was scripted by editors and producers. They made her seem like a tough woman who could handle chaos, manage a household in the middle of nowhere, and keep Tony from completely losing his mind during failed seasons and financial disasters. She ran the books, raised the kids, and rarely complained on camera. To the viewing public, she was the anchor of the Beets operation, a woman of few words and immense practicality. But the people who knew Minnie before the cameras arrived tell a more complicated story. According to sources, Minnie had interests, ambitions, and connections that never made it onto the screen. There were entire chapters of her life that were carefully kept away from the Gold Rush production crew. And the reasons for that, as we will discover, are far more complex than simple privacy. The real question is not what Minnie showed the world. The question is what she was allegedly doing when the cameras turned off, and why it took so long for any of it to surface. A life before the Yukon nobody talks about. To understand who Minnie Beets really is, investigators had to go back to the Netherlands, to a life that predates the Gold Rush, the Yukon, and the version of herself that millions of viewers came to know. Tony and Minnie both grew up in Holland, and while Tony was already developing his reputation as a man who would rather take a gamble on hard labor than sit comfortably behind a desk, Minnie was allegedly pursuing a very different kind of education. Sources close to the family have alleged that Minnie had been involved in business dealings back in the Netherlands that were significantly more sophisticated than anything she ever discussed on television. According to people who knew her during those years, Minnie was not just a homemaker waiting for Tony to come up with a plan. She was well connected in certain financial and business circles in Holland, and some of those connections followed her across the Atlantic when the Beets family relocated to Canada. Whether Tony was fully aware of the extent of those connections has been a subject of quiet debate among people close to the situation. What is known publicly is that once the Beets family settled into the Yukon, Minnie became the financial backbone of the operation. She handled the payroll, the taxes, the contracts, and the equipment costs, tasks that require a level of financial fluency that does not simply appear out of thin air. That background had to come from somewhere, and according to some accounts, it came from a chapter of her life that she never opened up about on camera. The question of what that chapter contained would become significantly more pressing once the cameras started rolling and the world began paying attention to every detail of the Beets family's life. The double role that defined her marriage. For over 30 years, Minnie Beets has been playing 2 roles at the same time, and understanding the tension between those 2 roles is the only way to truly understand her story. On one side, she was a devoted wife and mother. She drove ATVs across frozen land just to bring her husband lunch, homeschooled her kids in one of the most isolated places in North America, and handled the day-to-day reality of raising a family on a mining claim miles away from the nearest city. That version of Minnie was real, well-documented, and completely genuine. But there was another side to Minnie that was running at the same time. She was allegedly making financial and business decisions that Tony did not always know about. According to sources, there were investment choices, property deals, and business relationships that she handled on her own. And sometimes Tony only found out about them after everything was already done. Whether she did all of this because Tony trusted her completely or because he simply was not aware, allegedly, is left for the jury to decide. What made this dynamic particularly fascinating on Gold Rush was how carefully Minnie controlled her own image. She was almost never the subject of conflict or scandal on the show. While Tony raged and ranted and occasionally fired people on camera, Minnie remained calm, practical, and almost deliberately uninteresting to the producers. Former crew members who worked on the show have reportedly suggested that Minnie was acutely aware of what the cameras captured and that she made deliberate choices about what she allowed to be filmed. For a woman who had spent decades keeping certain things private, having a reality TV crew show up on her property was not just annoying. It was the biggest test her double life had ever faced. But she handled it the same way she handled everything else, quietly and efficiently. But even Minnie's considerable composure could not prevent certain truths from beginning to surface, especially once the children grew old enough to have their own complicated stories. The children who inherited more than gold. Tony and Minnie raised 4 children on the Beets mining claim: Monica, Mike, Kevin, and Bianca. And all 4 of them eventually became part of the Gold Rush story in one way or another. Monica grew up to become Tony's most trusted person on the show, and she stepped into real leadership roles that made her one of the most interesting people in the whole series. She was not just Tony's daughter on screen, she was genuinely running things, and viewers could see it. Mike and Kevin also had their moments, though theirs were a little more complicated. Both of them had very visible conflicts with their father on camera, and those arguments were not always easy to watch. But as interesting as all of that was, what happened behind the scenes within the Beet family tells a completely different kind of story, one that the cameras never fully captured. Sources close to the family have alleged that Minnie's influence on the children went far beyond the maternal warmth she displayed on television. Allegedly, she was deeply involved in shaping the professional futures of her children in ways that sometimes put her in a complicated position relative to Tony's wishes and the family business. There were disagreements about the direction of the mining operation that filtered down through the children, with Minnie taking positions that did not always align with the version of events that made it onto the screen. Monica Beets, who married fellow miner Taylor Mays and kept working in the family business, has talked openly about how much pressure there was growing up in the Beets household. But she has also said very warm things about her mother's strength, and she has described Minnie as the kind of woman who could walk into any situation and handle it without ever letting people see her sweat. That is not a small thing to say about someone, and it means even more when you consider that it is coming from a person who grew up watching her mother work in real time, every single day. For Minnie to leave that kind of impression on her own daughter, she had to have a level of composure that most people simply do not have. What is arguably most fascinating about the Beets children is that each of them, in different ways, carries traces of both parents. From Tony, they inherited the stubbornness, the work ethic, and the appetite for big risks. From Minnie, they allegedly inherited something harder to name: a kind of strategic intelligence, a tendency to hold things close, and a deep understanding that what you show the world is rarely the whole story. And as those children grew older, and the family's television fame continued to grow, the pressure on Minnie's carefully managed image would intensify in ways that no one in the Beets household had anticipated. The business empire nobody credited her for. When Gold Rush viewers watch Tony Beets' work, they are watching a man who moves through the world like a force of nature, loud, decisive, physically imposing, and absolutely convinced of his own rightness. It is easy, watching him direct equipment and bark orders at his crew, to conclude that everything the Beets family has built is a product of his vision and his will. But people who have followed the family closely, and people who have allegedly worked alongside both of them, tell a very different story about who actually runs the Beets empire. Was out there building his reputation and operating the equipment, Minnie was managing the money with a level of precision and skill that even Tony has openly admitted to on more than one occasion. In interviews, Tony has said that Minnie is the one who handles the business side of things, and he has never been shy about giving her that credit. But even that description does not fully capture what she does. If anything, calling her the person who handles the business side is actually an understatement, and by quite a large margin. The acquisition of the Viking dredge, for example, was one of the most iconic moments in Gold Rush history. Tony paid $1 million for a 75-year-old floating bucket dredge that had not run in over 30 years, and the cameras made it look like a straightforward, passionate decision by a man who loved big machinery. But the financial structuring behind that deal was far more complicated than what made it onto the screen, and Minnie was allegedly the one quietly making sure the numbers worked. Insiders have claimed that Minnie had her hands in a number of other ventures that never appeared on Gold Rush at all, including alleged side businesses, undisclosed property arrangements, and what some sources have described as high-stakes private dealings that operated completely outside of the mining world. There were even whispers, never confirmed, that Minnie had an interest in certain gambling-related investments and that some of her business relationships stretched far beyond the Yukon and into financial circles that had nothing to do with gold mining. Tony may have been the face of the operation, but Minnie was the engine running quietly underneath it all. And it would explain why, despite decades of living on camera, Minnie has managed to remain one of the most genuinely mysterious figures in reality television, when the cameras caught what they weren't supposed to. Reality television has a way of capturing things that were never meant to be seen. Directors and producers spend enormous energy trying to shape a narrative, but the cameras run for hours and days at a time, and the gaps between the curated story and the actual story have a tendency to appear in unexpected moments. For Minnie Beets, one of the most watched women in Gold Rush history, those gaps became harder to manage as the show continued season after season. Former production staff members have said that there were moments during filming where Minnie's composure slipped in ways that the producers decided to leave out of the final cut. These were conversations between her and Tony that showed a level of disagreement and tension in their relationship that did not fit the warm, happy family image the show was trying to sell to viewers. And according to those same sources, these were not just normal husband and wife arguments about small things. There were glimpses of a woman who was carrying around an enormous amount of information and pressure, and who simply could not talk about any of it on camera. It was as if there was a whole other conversation happening underneath the one the cameras were capturing. And every now and then, allegedly, the surface cracked just enough for the people in the room to notice. There were also moments during filming where Minnie was seen making or receiving phone calls that made some members of the production team visibly uncomfortable. And these were not calls about mining equipment or payroll. According to sources, some of those calls were connected to business dealings that had nothing to do with gold mining at all. And at least one former crew member has claimed that some of those conversations sounded like they were connected to financial arrangements that were, to put it politely, operating in a very gray area. There were even rumors among the production staff that Minnie was in contact with people outside of the Yukon who were involved in businesses that nobody on the Gold Rush crew could fully explain. Whether any of that ever led to a serious conversation between the producers and the Beets family is not clear. But what several people who worked on the show have said is that Minnie always knew exactly where every single camera was pointed at any given moment, and she never said anything near one that she did not want the world to hear. None of this is to say that anything illegal or scandalous was taking place, but the pattern of behavior described by multiple people who were present during filming paints a portrait of a woman who was simultaneously performing one life for the cameras while actively managing another one entirely off-screen. What makes this remarkable is not that it happened, but that it continued for as long as it did, and that the truth of it has only begun to emerge now, years after the Beets family's Gold Rush story was already written into television history. The truth that surfaced after the cameras left. Every long-running TV show comes to an end at some point, and when it does, the people who spent years living in front of cameras are suddenly left to deal with real life without the structure and the pressure that filming used to give them. For the Beets family, life after the Gold Rush has not been as simple as riding off into the sunset. Instead, it has brought with it a slow and quiet reckoning, a moment where things that the cameras never caught and that the family never talked about publicly have started to find their way to the surface, whether the family wanted them to or not. Sources close to the Beets family have alleged that in recent years, certain parts of Minnie's private life have become harder to keep under wraps. Some of the business interests she maintained separately from the gold mining operation have become topics of conversation within the family, and not always comfortable ones. Whether Tony, a man who spent decades trusting his wife completely with the financial side of their life together, ever fully understood the extent of what Minnie was managing behind the scenes is a question that, according to those same sources, has still not been answered. And keep in mind, this is a family with an estimated net worth of $15 million, according to Celebrity Net Worth, built largely on the back of one of the biggest gold mining operations in the entire Klondike. That kind of money does not manage itself, and somebody had to be making the right moves quietly and consistently for decades. That is not the behavior of someone who is living carelessly or without a plan. That is the behavior of someone who knew exactly what they were doing, planned every step carefully, and executed it all without ever making a scene. Minnie Beets has never spoken publicly about any of these allegations, and she should not be expected to. She is, by every account, a private person who found herself thrust into public life by marriage to one of television's most magnetic personalities. Whatever she kept private for reasons that were her own, and perhaps those reasons deserve the same respect that she gave to Tony's dreams for 30 years in the Yukon cold. As of today, the Beets family is still very much active. Tony is currently in his 16th season of Gold Rush, still chasing gold at Paradise Hill and pushing hard to take advantage of historically high gold prices with a season goal of 6,500 ounces worth upwards of $22 million. Monica is still running her own crew and raising her daughter Jasmine with husband Taylor Mays. Kevin and Mike are both still working in the family mining operation, each running their own sections of the business. And Minnie? She is still there too, managing the books and controlling the purse strings. So what is the real story of Minnie Beets, the quiet powerhouse behind the gold, or a woman who simply chose to live on her own terms? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.